So what we're going to cover in this first section is how to add charts and how to put them in groups. And this is important so that you don't see all the charts all the time, because you'll end up with too many charts, for example, pilot charts or charts of the northeast of the USA that you don't care about when you're navigating with the posse. And you don't want those to be cluttering up the memory and bogging down the computer. So what we're going to do, here we've got the basic view, and I'm going to go into Tools. Then I'm going to go to Options. And I'm going to go to Charts. Now here, I've got two chart groups. I've got the GSHHG, which is the overall global outline chart, and I've got another directory called fleets that are added. And now I'm going to add another directory. I'm going to add the CM93 directory, so I'm going to select that. Now that's been added in, and I'm going to click on Apply. And then I'm going to scan the charts and update the database. Now I'm going to go back into Options, Charts, and I'm going to go into Chart Groups. And I'm going to say, I'm going to create a new group, which is called Seminar. And that group is going to contain CM93 and Fleet. So we'll see the underlying CM93 and the underlying Fleet. Now you may want to create one called Navigation. Perhaps you would create another one called Pilot Charts that only created the pilot charts, and so on. So now we'll apply that. Now, when I go in to Chart Groups, I can go to Seminar, and now it will show me the underlying CM93 charts, and where I have other options available. So for example, in the Fleet directory, I've created one for the entry to El Salvador. It's outlined here in red, and it would allow me to choose between them so that I can go and select the entry to El Salvador and the El Salvador estuary. And I do that by clicking on the colored bars down on the bottom. Now let's go and create some charts and put them in here and have a look at how they work. So the first thing we want to do is try to find an area that we care about. Now let's say, because we're going down to Panama, that we care very deeply about a bunch of different places, but one that we care about a fair amount is this Isla Sabaco. Isla Sabaco, and in this bay down here on the eastern end of the island, is basically the only place that you can get fuel between David and Panama City, so many people stop in here. Now, we want to create a satellite chart of the bay right here, because as we zoom in, you'll notice in my CM93 chart that I don't see a huge amount of detail. I mean, it looks okay, we see the depth, but and here we've got depth expressed in feet. So I can see some depths, I can see some drying areas, I can see some beaches, some shallow areas, but it doesn't look like it's got a tremendous amount of detail in it. So what I'm going to do is open up SAS Planet. And now I'm going to go over And I'm going to create a new screen share that shows SAS Planet. And this is the program that we're going to create our satellite charts out of. So here, if I look at the Islas Abaco and this bay, you can see that I get a tremendous amount more detail of the shoreline. However, here, this area is covered by puffy white clouds. And of course, we're sailing in the area of puffy white clouds. So what I want to do is try to find inside SAS Planet images that don't lose the detail of this point and what's going on in the bay. Now, one of the nice things about SAS Planet is it allows you to select multiple maps. I can go up to maps. Now, right now, I'm looking at Google satellite maps, and that's the image that I get. Another source that we can use is called Yandex. Yandex apparently is Russian for Google, and this is their satellite version. Now, when I look at the Yandex map, I like that a lot better because it doesn't have any puffy white clouds obscuring what I want to see. It seems to have a nice amount of detail, and I can zoom in and see what's there. And right here, I can see my maximum detail. Down in this corner is Z18, because when I try to zoom in past Z18 to 19, the screen goes blank. So that's what SAS Planet does to tell me. Now, there are also other sources. So I can go maps and I could look, for example, at Bing Satellite. And Bing Satellite and Yandex they seem to have about the same amount of detail. And if I zoom in with Bing, I get layer 17 is present, layer 18 is present, layer 19 is present, even layer 20 is present. And I don't lose detail until I go to level 21. Now, what level of detail you actually want to capture is a decision that you get to make. But once you found a map that looks pretty good, you want to scan around and see what's there. Make sure it's got the detail you want. And the key thing that I want here is to see this ship here, I'm indicating with the mouse. That's where you get fuel. They have a big fuel tank on board. You raft up to them and they hand the hose over and you fill up with fuel from that boat. We did that last year when we were passing through. Now, when I look at the source, I want to set to internet plus cache so that I can see what's in the cache plus what's in the internet. The way SAS Planet works is when you look at a particular image, puts it in the cache so it's available for later use. So going on internet and cache and knowing that I want the detail here, what we're going to do, and you can follow along on your own computers, is we're going to create for this end of Islas Abaco and for this bay where this ship is and where I want to see where boats are anchoring here and here, I want to create a chart. So what I'm going to do is go into Selection Manager and make a rectangular selection. I recommend always using rectangular because things get a little funky if you use the polygon or the polyline. So I'll say rectangular selection, and I'll just select from here and draw a box that goes to here. Now here, I know Bing maps are good, and I want to download them. And I know that they go up to level 20, but really 18 is good enough. And the more you download, the longer it takes. If I download level 18, and then I can download, for example, level 16 and level 14 for different view levels, that's probably pretty good. That's going to be 1,097 tiles for this selection. And what I want to do is split the selection into multiple parts. I'm going to say 20 multiple parts. And then I'm going to say start. It opens the multiple windows here. Now, I have the advantage of being in the first world doing this from my home in Vancouver, Canada, where I have very good quality internet. If you're in the seminar and trying to do this, you're probably not going to get a number like 45 seconds for the total download. You're probably going to get a number that's multiple minutes, maybe even 15 minutes. And if there's a lot of keen people in the seminar doing the download at exactly the same time, and you're taking up all the bandwidth the Barra de Navidad has trying to download this image area, you're probably going to see times that range up to 40 minutes. One of the difficulties with this technology is that when you do use it, it does want a fair amount of bandwidth or a fair amount of time. When I made the large scale charts that we have put on the Panama Posse site that are available for you to use, those literally took full-time work of a month of the computer working. I would set it to download tiles, and then I would come back 3 or 4 hours later and create the MB tiles chart, and then I would repeat for a different area of coast and so on and so on and so on until it was completed. Now, when that's finished, so this download is completed, this download is completed. I close all of these. I've now downloaded, so now I can go into Operations, Selection Manager, Last Selection, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to export. I'm going to create an MB tiles file. Now, here I say I'm going to create, in the top box, I'm going to select MB tiles. And then I need to tell it where I'm going to save it to. And I'm going to save it into this directory called Charts Fleet on my hard drive. And I'm going to call this Sabaco. And I'm going to use those Bing maps we just downloaded, and I'm going to download the overlay of Google. That gives me the names you see here, like Manzanillo, the name of the little town up here, Isla Tintorina, and so on. Those come from that hybrid layer. Then I'm going to select the layers, which were 18, 16, and 14 that I wanted to use. So now I've set it up. I've told it I want MB tiles. I've told it I want to call this Sabaco. I've told it that I wanted to use those Bing maps we just downloaded, which gave me a good image. And I wanted to overlay Google so I get some place names. And I've told it the zoom levels that I want. So I click on Start. And it's going to process now. That was 1,100 files. And it's doing all of that on my hard drive. So now that has completed. So now I am going to go back to Open CPN. And here I have my Open CPN. There's that area that we've just done the satellite chart of. And now what I want to do is go into Tools, Options, Charts, and I want to scan the charts and update the database because OpenCPN doesn't know that I created that yet. So I click on Apply, and it goes through. And now when we look, you see this red box, which indicates the area that I have a chart for. And when I zoom in, I can switch over to that chart and get the detail that I want. Now, as I zoom in further, up to the level 18, and that's the level 18 data there, it gives me more and more information. And it shows me the place names, and that changes as I zoom in and out. So when I zoom out, the Sabaco Bay Sport Fishing Club sign goes away. But as you zoom, it shows you different layers, different levels. So what we've done there, just to go over the steps again, is inside SAS Planet, we've looked at an area that we want a satellite chart for. We've selected a set of charts that are a set of satellite images that are going to give us a useful chart, ones that are not obscured. And then we've created an MB tiles chart of that area. We then, having loaded that into the directory that Open CPN already knew to look in, we then reminded Open CPN that it had to have a look into the directory and find that chart and index it, which it's now done. And now that chart shows up and gives us the detail we want. Now that's just one example, but let's go over to another area. Many of you are probably planning to visit the Sandblas Islands. So here's a chart of the Sandblas Islands in CM93 charts. And up here in the Hollands Key, there's some islands that people regularly visit. And you can see, just at a glance, that this chart doesn't look fantastic. So let's have a look at the Sandblas Islands and see what we can see inside Open CPN, inside SAS Planet rather. So now I'm going to go back to SAS Planet. And I'm going to go over and find those Sandblas Islands. And that area we were looking at is up here by Turtle Island. So I'm going to select, usually I've found that Google Maps is the best, generally speaking. However, general rules, you have to have a closer look. If we look at Turtle Island here and we look at it in Google, you can see that the detail isn't fantastic. And as I zoom in a little bit more, you can see the detail's not getting any better. There's really not great detail, except right on the island itself, where I can literally dial right in to the highest level of detail, zoom level down here in the corner again, zoom level 24, and I can look at a dinghy on the beach and I can see that they've apparently left their life jackets in the dinghy, but not their flip-flops. So there's a tremendous amount of detail on this island, which is fantastic, right? However, this island here, nada, there's nothing. So let's have a look at what some other maps might be to look at that. If we look at Yandex, for example, Yandex was really good for that other island we looked at, but here, if we look at, it's got sort of a big hole where we'd expect Turtle Island to be, and it doesn't, it's only at zoom level 14, which is kind of crappy. But if we look at Bing, and we look at Bing satellite, Bing satellite seems much better. Now, if we zoom in on that same area on the island, it ends at zoom level 20, and the detail's not as good on that island as it was in Google Maps. On the other hand, whether they left their flip-flops in the dinghy or not isn't all that important to us. But what is really nice to know is that when we zoom out a little bit here, we can see there's a bunch of anchored boats here. So this apparently is the anchorage. We can see this channel looks like it's good and clear for navigation, and this one here looks a little shallow, a little sketchy. When we zoom in a little bit, we can see evidence of a reef here that we're going to want to avoid. So the entrance looks to me like we're going to want to go in on this side. This side might be viable for someone like Dietmar in a catamaran, but in my monohull, I'll want to go in here. There's the anchorage. And I've got pretty good detail on this island. I can zoom in to level 20. And I can see there's reefs here, but this looks like a better beach to get to by dinghy, for example. So in every case, you want to shop around a little bit and try to find what charts are going to, what satellite images are going to deliver you the best chart. And it's really variable by area. The ones that I've created, I've tried to pick some reasonable quality ones, but I have to say that not all of them are the very best. Now, why do you want to use these charts? If we look at, for example, many of you are probably using Navionics, and if we look at Navionics marine charts for this area, that's what they give you. So that, as a aid to navigation, puts you over to the eyeball Mark 1 pretty fast. Other maps, marine maps that you might be using, some of you might be using CMAP, which is about on a par. And what you'll find as you travel through this area is that these various locations, while charts are improving all the time, in some of these areas, in the anchorages that we go to, they're really not all that useful. They give you a general idea or no idea at all. Let me show you another example of that over on the Pacific side. One of the areas that we went through before we rounded Punta Mala, almost everyone will go into this little bay here. Just outside the town of Banao. Now, this is what it looks like now on the CMAP. And if we look at the Navionics marine charts, it looks like this. So in Navionics, it shows that entire bay as drying completely. Now, when we anchored there, we anchored right about here. And I can assure you that with our 8-foot draft, we did not go aground, even when the tide was out. But if we look at, for example, on Google satellite images, you can see a completely different sense of what's there. So here we can see sandy spots, you know, where it's coming out. And you can see very clearly areas that are deeper, areas that are more shallow. And when you're going into this bay, the trick is to come over to the island here, find a depth you're comfortable with, and anchor over this way. And then you get in the lee of this island, which is to be preferred to avoid the surf. Other maps we could look at, again, we could look at Yandex. And on Yandex, it's much better on this side, and it goes up to level 18, where in the San Blas Islands it only went to 14 and was really bad. And here you can see an anchored boat. You can see where the surf comes in, and you can see over here, the surf is much diminished compared to what it is over here. You could anchor here, you could anchor here, or you could anchor over on this side. Over on this side, as you can see from the reduced surf, is much more comfortable. Let's have a look and see what it looks like in Bing. Bing satellite. Here we go. Again, you can see an anchored boat. The surf was apparently coming in at a different angle. There's more surf on this side now, but it gives you a much better idea of what's going on. So what I'm doing is, in the areas that I care about, I'm shopping around for really good satellite images so that I get the best ones that I can. And then I'm going with those to create the MV Tiles files that I put into the Open CPN. Let's have a look at another area. Most of you will probably go through Western Panama. And before you get, if you're coming south, before you get to Sabaco, you'll stop off here in Bahia Honda. Bahia Honda is a lovely spot, fabulous anchorage, dead flat calm. But let's look at that in some different layers. So what does Google show us? Now this is another problem that you get sometimes. And here when I zoom in a little, you can see there's the Isla de Managua. Yes, there is a bar right here. But here you can see that in this satellite image, it was high tide. And in this satellite image, it was low tide, and it shows a drying bank. So a high tide image in here is not as interesting to us. So again, we can shop around and we can look, for example, at Yandex. We look at Yandex, that looks like it's pretty close to a low tide image. The quality is about the same, maybe even a little better than the Google Maps image. And here it shows you that, you could travel in there quite a ways by dinghy, perhaps a fair ways going in just by your main ship. And it gives you a good idea of where the drying banks are. Where the drying banks are, of course, is something you want to know in advance. Let's have a look at one other source here. Let's look at Bing satellite. Bing doesn't seem to have the same amount of contrast. And here, this image has been taken at high tide or a higher tide, and you can't see the extent of the drying banks. There's a hint of where they go to, but you can't see it with the same amount of detail. So when you're doing these smaller areas that you care about and you're creating charts, you can shop around for who has the best image. Now, if we look at that again in a map source you might have using marine maps, go down to Navionics, it gives a fairly good indication of where the drying areas are. But if we compare that to Yandex, for example, you'll see this drying bank here. Now watch when I flip the view over to marine maps and Navionics. Here, they're showing that drying bank as being much smaller. The satellite image actually tells you the drying bank comes out to here, where they're showing depths of 1.2 meters, which is a pretty significant difference. So this will help you when you're in close to shore in telling the difference between where your charts are telling you something that's close to the truth and where they're lying to you. Now, some of the other issues that you have with satellite charts are particularly around offlying hazards, and I just want to highlight this for you. If we go into Google Satellite, and for example, we'll go back down here to that bay we had a look at. Let me just find that now. By Punta Mala. Now, offlying here, there's some pretty nasty rocks. You can see them quite clearly in the satellite image where they come out. Over here, this is just a bit of cloud. And if I go into the maps layer, that's what I see on Google Maps. I can now look at that on Yandex. And Yandex gives me an even more, an image with more clarity. And here you can see by the disturbed water that there's rocks that are just at the level of the water, and they're disturbing the waves as they pass over. And again, I can go in and look at that on Bing. And Bing isn't as good. Now, what makes an image good or bad? Cloud cover, obviously, and for areas that have a decent tidal range, like they do in Panama in many areas, so being able to see it at the low tide as opposed to the high tide is important. And this, the images that they're using will give you an indication of what that is. How does that show up on a marine chart? Let's have a look. So it gives an indication of a rock here, but we can see on the satellite that the rock's actually further out. Let's switch back again. go to Yandex, that was the clearest. So they've got a rock marked here. This is a rock that's dry all the time, and it's not on the chart at all. So that gives you another indication of the kind of detail that you'll pick up. Look at these offlying rocky islands. These are dry all the time. And let's switch back to the Navionics marine chart. It bears a very faint resemblance to what you see. So by downloading the satellite images, you create the ability to use your eyeball Mark 1, your primary navigation aid, much more accurately and know what you're looking for. When you're coming to enter this bay, I'll just zoom out a little bit. When you're coming, for example, in from the west and you're going to enter that bay, it's really nice to know that aside from these two rocks, which apparently are there, there's another rock offshore here that isn't shown on the chart. And it's also really nice to know that this bay where you're going to anchor doesn't actually dry completely, and that the anchorage, the preferred anchorage, is down here, which is shown as a drying bank, but obviously doesn't dry when you look at the satellite images. So that gives an example of some of the differences that you'll see between marine charts and satellite images. And I've given an example of how to create one.
That's great. Great, Rob. Thank you. That's a fantastic summary, and with lots of details on how to use SAS Planet.